Hey everybody, welcome to the Tech Interview Guide. I am your host, Ian Douglas. I am the author of the website. Let me readjust this screen here a tiny bit so you can see our faces a little better. Actually, I'm going to do this. Hold this over here. There we go. Cool, well, welcome. I am the author of the website techinterview.guide, and tonight we're exploring the whole idea of what is developer relations. And I got a whole really awesome crew of folks hanging out with me tonight. Really appreciate everybody's time. We're going to kind of go around the interface as I see it, and we'll do some quick introductions, and we'll go from there. So first off, we got Christina. Christina, why don't you give us a little bit of an intro for who you are, what you do, and then we'll go on to Danny from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. I'm Christina Monti. I work at PayPal as a developer relations lead. I have been at PayPal for 5 years, and I will talk about really quickly my tech journey as a non-traditional tech journey, which I started in the financial districts and doing some banking and worked my way into user acceptance testing, where I was writing test scripts for different organizations, including American Express. I worked up to integrations and helping merchants integrate products and solutions, and then ultimately landed at PayPal, and I've been there ever since.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks, Christina. Let's go on to Danny.
Hello, everyone. My name is Danny Ramos. I am a developer relations engineer at New Relic, and I've been there for 1 year. It's actually my first tech job out of code school, because I went to code school 2 years ago during quarantine. That was very fun. And Ian was actually one of my instructors, so I'm very happy to be here, be a guest. And I basically was working at Costco for 9 years and decided I wanted something new and went to code school. And now I live in the Bay, have a cool job, and feel pretty good about it.
Thanks, Danny. Let's go to Lily next.
Hey everyone, I'm Lily. I'm a community manager and have been in this role for various organizations over the last few years. I also have a somewhat non-traditional way of getting into tech via retail, finance, operations management, and then finally tech adjacent and then into tech. So yeah, back to you, Ian.
Awesome. And on to Wesley.
My name is Wesley Faulkner. I am the head of community at a database company called Single Store. I've been there for approximately 10 months, but I've been doing developer relations for the past 4 years for various companies. And before that, I did a healthy chunk of social media management. And then before that, I was a product development engineer at a chip company called AMD. I'm also a little chip company. I'm also a co-host of a developer relations-centric podcast called Community Pulse.
Awesome. Cool. Well, everybody on the stream knows me. I'm the author of this website, but I'm also a developer advocate at Postman, which has been a fantastic job. I've been there, just wrapped up my first 4 weeks at the company, and it's a blast. My second DevRel job, and kind of explaining on the stream here to folks about what my job hunt was like in December and January, and almost being Danny's coworker at New Relic, but didn't quite work out. Had some questions come in about what is developer relations, like what does it mean to be a developer advocate? And so I thought that'd be a good sort of panel discussion. And so I assembled this great crew of folks to help out and kind of go through the discussion a little bit tonight. So I appreciate all of the introductions. Good to see everybody in chat. Kubiti, we got Heartbender in there. We got Zooey dropping by. Good to see you, Zooey. And a handful of the typical hooligans of Tech Dinosaur, 3D Print Fan. Python Nate, yeah, Python Nate's here too. Good times. My typical trio that follow me around every live stream I do. So appreciate everybody dropping by. So Danny, thanks for the follow. Give you some blinky lights and some appreciate that. And I do appreciate the other follows coming in as well. LIZ, thanks for the follow as well. Cool. So I'm broadcasting live on Twitch as well as on LinkedIn. If you want your message to show up in this panel over on this side for LinkedIn, actually it's mirrored. This side? No, it's this side. It's over on this side. my video is reversed for some reason. Yeah, if you want your question to show up in that chat panel over on the left side of the interface, you will need to come over to twitch.tv. If you are watching on LinkedIn, I am paying attention to the comments. So feel free to leave comments and questions on LinkedIn as well. If you're watching on YouTube later on, please like and subscribe. I'm really bad at marketing, so I need all of you to help me. We did publicize this a little bit on Twitter. We got some people liking it and so on. I appreciate everybody's time tonight to help us out. So let's dive in a little bit around what is developer relations. And I think I'm going to start with Danny on this one. So Danny, you went to a code school, you studied software development, and now you're a developer relations advocate at New Relic. How do you explain to your non-technical family what it is you do? So I kind of want to like ask everybody here, like, how do you explain what you do? Like I went for a haircut the other day and they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, if I say developer advocate, they have no idea what that means. So Danny, let's start with you. How do you describe to folks what your role is, like what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Right. I like how you said my non-technical family, because that's very much them. And they still have no idea what I really do. They're just like, oh, you have a very nice computer. And that's really all they really know what I do. I basically, well, I guess from my role specifically, because I am the junior on the team, I say that I'm here to like learn in public and learn alongside the tech community and show them like, oh, all the cool things that observability does, or all the cool things New Relic does, or like, I want to learn about Kubernetes. So I'm going to learn about Kubernetes and let's learn that together. And there's going to be a lot of failure on camera or talking about it in a blog post or, it's just going to be a lot of failure in general. But I think that type of content was comforting for me because it made me feel like there was like a human person also teaching me how to code and not some like super genius that I thought some people were. And so I really just try to describe it as I'm here to learn in public and educate people on the benefits of observability, because that relates to like the product of New Relic, and that's the company that pays my bills.
LIZ says in chat, I say I'm like an influencer, but for tech stuff. A good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's go to Christina. Christina, how do you describe what you do to people that are not in the tech industry?
I have definitely had so many different ways of describing what I do, especially at PayPal, because mostly when you start with, I work at PayPal, most of the time, oh, what do you do? So I currently, if I were to describe to anyone that is non-technical what I do, a lot of what I do is advocating for the developer experience within the organization to ensure that the products are aligning with, a simple and easy and a self-serve experience, making sure that they have just the tools that they need and that the products that we have are being built with them in mind. And so I that's how I would describe it to a non-technical person in my family.
Awesome. Lily, how about yourself?
Yeah, I found I think somewhat easy way to describe it to my non-technical friends. I just tell them I like to help developers find resources they need, facilitate feedback where it's important, make connections, help them network, and just really like a middleman helper person. It's really the easiest way to describe what I do for them.
Yeah, great. Wesley, how about yourself?
Well, I would first like to say that I think developer relations is a department, not necessarily a function. So there's several things and several activities underneath that umbrella of developer relations. But I think if we were going to encapsulate what developer relations is, I would say it is the person doing, I'll start with the developer advocate. The developer advocate represents the company to the community and also represents the community to the company in behind the four walls inside those boardrooms, making sure that the wants and needs of the community is brought to the table, and then making sure that there is a virtuous cycle of that feedback going from inside to outside, outside to inside, continuously.
Awesome. My funniest story about explaining what I do is I was so both occasions happened getting a haircut. The most recent one was what do you do? How was your day? I'm like, oh, I'm just working. And they're like, oh, what do you do? And I blanket statement, I said, I do software training, because that's the easiest way to kind of explain what it is I do as the developer relations person at Postman. Is I help people understand what our product is. And so I do software training, also / instructor, teaching Danny. But the funniest one was like the first time I had a developer relations role, I was getting a haircut and this old lady's cutting my hair. And she said, what do you do? I said, oh, I do developer relations. And she kind of got quiet for a minute, and she's cutting through my hair, and she's like, is that like an online dating thing? I'm like, no, wrong kind of relations. So I had to explain. It's like, no, this is what we do. Like, we teach people about our software. And she's like, oh, okay. Like, still had no idea. So I'm like, I need a better, like, everyday language sort of description of what it is I do. And I think software trainer is probably the easiest thing. But I mean, there's so much involved in what developer relations is. And Wesley, I like how you kind of brought up like developer relations is kind of the department, but like what we do, it really does vary quite a bit from the community side of things. Not really so much as far as sales, but we do kind of help with marketing. There's the education side of it, certainly. And so there's a lot of aspects, but definitely playing that liaison between, the customer and the company. And we're kind of that person in the middle, like Lily said, of like trying to translate feedback and sort of ideas and product and things like that. So yeah, excellent. Cool.
Are they asking you what you do when they're cut your hair to figure out what kind of tip you're going to leave them? Is that
maybe that could very well be. Yeah, I don't want to lie and say I've got like, oh, I work at Walmart or something like that. So they're like, oh, this guy's not going to give me a tip and have him ruin my hair or something. But I also don't want to get their hopes up and be like, oh yeah, I work in the tech industry. They're like, oh, this guy's going to tip me well, and then I don't tip, and then the next time I come in, they like shave me bald or something. But we're going kind of off topic here. Any other funny stories that anybody wants to share around like describing what you do and like getting funny looks or anything like that?
Well, the company I work for is Single Store, so that sounds like a dating app. So I've gotten that before.
That's great. Is that like a marketplace for single people?
Yes.
It's funny. All right, well, cool. Well, we've got a bit of an agenda to go through where we want to talk about like what is developer relations and what is it not. And Christina, we'll start with you on that one. But if you have questions for the panel, absolutely drop them in chat on Twitch. You can drop them in comments on LinkedIn. I'm paying attention to those. So Christina, you kind of brought up like a panel discussion in another community that I'm a part of where you're talking about like what is developer relations, and one of the points that you brought up is what is not developer relations, because there can be a bit of a misunderstanding from a company's perspective about what developer relations is or should be from a corporate kind of mindset. So why don't you share your thoughts for a minute about like what is developer relations not? Like what are some common misconceptions that you see like at a company level or organization level about DevRel?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll start with the story of how I even came up with the question. And so I will say that in the last 2 to 3 months, maybe even longer, I've been sitting in a lot of Twitter spaces, and everybody really wants to know what developer relations is. And I never actually heard anybody saying what developer relations isn't. And as someone who's helping and strategizing to lead developer relations at PayPal, it is a newer organization to try and create in within the walls, and it's been a little challenging per se, based on the fact that everyone has their own opinion of what developer relations is. And I usually always preface that this is my opinion of dev relations, because there is no necessarily like right way or wrong way. In my opinion, I think that there's a way that works for the organization. And so I just wanted to make sure that in my role in the program that I had, I was creating good boundaries and healthy boundaries with what DevRel is and what DevRel isn't. I wanted to make sure that I was providing space for the DevRel advocates to ensure that they had opportunities and understood what their role was in the organization, and ultimately being able to advocate within the walls so that, this is what we can do and this is what we can't do in order to ensure that we're successful and the company's successful, and ultimately the developers are successful within the organization. So do you want me to go through the list? Because I had a whole list of things of what it wasn't.
I mean, maybe just like recap and highlight some of the more common misconceptions maybe about what DevRel is.
Yeah, so the biggest one that I consistently saw, and anyone who wants to look on Twitter, you can see the tweet. It went around quite a long time, I think 2 weeks almost. But the biggest one that I could say I kept seeing was it's not marketing. And that's debatable. I know, I'll leave it there. Some people think it's marketing, some people think it's not. So we're just going to leave it at that. But that was the number one thing people would say, is that it's not necessarily marketing. And there are those that feel like it's a pre-marketing, or it's an arm to marketing, or it's something, but it's not necessarily marketing. It's not the way that an organization should put all their chips in a basket to get their audience, right? There's other ways. And in our example, I would say we're more of like the education and the support and community building. And there's nothing wrong with either ways. I think it works for the business, but that was a really big one, was that we're not marketing. Another one that would be funny to folks would be we're not collecting stickers anymore. Most people have a conception that it was a sticker collecting role. And yes, Wesley, I'm sure, do you have some stickers?
I got socks.
I love socks. Those are awesome. What else? It's not it's not a funnel. It's not tech support. So one of I think the biggest misconceptions is that it is technical support. I think that they play a part in technical support only because of the fact that as a developer advocate or as a developer relations in any of the roles, you're somehow trying to help someone, which is a developer, get unstuck in one way or another. Whether you're trying to find who they're going to get inside the walls of the organization you sit in, or if you're going to help them yourself, you are unblocking them in one way or another. But that doesn't necessarily mean that DevRel is tech support per se. So those were a couple of the big ones that I can remember offhand. Is there any that I ever forgot that were really funny? What other one? I'll come back to me because there's probably so many more.
Sounds good. Wesley, what would you say are some misconceptions, like as you talk to people about DevRel and what being a developer advocate is about? Like, what are some common misconceptions that you find?
One of the misconceptions that I found is that some people think that developer relations is just a person and not department. That's one. But the reason why that the distinction matters is because a lot of startups who are hiring for their first person to do developer relations pose it as a scale up kind of role. And sometimes it's not that cut and dry. Just like when you have someone who's a really good engineer, they may not be the best engineer manager. Someone who comes in as a practitioner of developer relations may not be the best in terms of strategy related to developer relations. Those are similar but different skill sets. And so I think that is the biggest misconception, that if you find someone who's good at doing developer relations, they're good at developer relations strategy.
Yeah, great. Lily, any thoughts?
Yeah, the two biggest ones, one was already sort of mentioned, is the whole marketing sales one. And as Christina said, that's heavily debated whether it's part of marketing or not, whether it's sales or not. And then the other misconception, and I'm gonna call it a misconception that I see a lot, is that engineers seem to think that developer relations aren't real engineers, or that there's minimal code or no code. And to be fair, I've seen some DevRels really do bare minimum code, but I've seen DevRels just code a ton because they absolutely love what they do. And so that's really a misconception I see a lot, where it's like, oh, you don't need to code to be a DevRel. It's like, you may not need to be a full-blown engineer, but you definitely should know how to code.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Danny, any thoughts, and we'll move on to next topic?
Yeah, so for me, I'll talk about the misconceptions that I ran into for like myself. I initially thought DevRel, you had to be some type of like celebrity in the tech space. And joining my team, I had the least amount of followers on Twitter. Like Twitter for me was just to like practice jokes. and I didn't even have that many followers then. So maybe my jokes weren't very good, but I was very worried because I was like, I didn't know anyone. I didn't have like a network. And so I thought I was going to be very unsuccessful at the job. But that's really not the case. You know, you don't have, I mean, it's nice, I guess, to have followers and a big network, but I think if you're just genuine and you really are aiming to teach people and educate people and share resources, it's like that saying, you know, if you build it, they will come. And it doesn't even matter if they come or not. You know, if you're just doing your work and you're being genuine and you're also learning yourself, then that's great as well. Another big thing was, I thought you had to be some seniored principal tech pro to go into DevRel. And that obviously is going to be really beneficial because you'll have a wide variety of knowledge. But I think a lot of companies are hiring junior developers or junior developer relations advocates, because there's just so many people who are learning how to be software engineers that the people who are juniors that are on the team can be that kind of like guide alongside them. And that's how I see my role.
Yeah, that's good. Eli Lucas or Eli Lucas, not sure how to pronounce your name, brought up a good question. How do you go about chatting with devs about your product? So kind of going on what Danny was just saying, like everybody that's coming to try your product for the first time is effectively a junior dev. Like they don't know nothing about it. They don't know your API. They don't know your product. They don't know how to kind of integrate things. And so everybody's kind of that beginner level all over again, no matter how experienced you are. So I like this question, like how do you chat with devs about the product? Like what sort of channels do you use? What kinds of activities? And then how do you bring that feedback back to your team? I think that this brings up several kinds of points here. Lily, let's start with you in community management. Like how do you manage that side of it from the community aspect of collecting that feedback, giving it to your product team or vice versa, to kind of play that liaison middleman person that you talked about? And then what kind of like other activities or events and so on go on to help with that education?
So a lot of the organizations I've been with, they always have either Slack or Discord set up, things like that. That makes it easy for us to connect with the community directly. I haven't been very active on Twitter at all. I probably should be more active, but right now I really do enjoy being in Slack and Discord where I know the community already is. I don't have to necessarily go out finding them. In terms of, feedback and activities, I've really come to love workshops, especially the more intimate workshops where you have maybe 10, 20, 30 attendees, where you have the time to dive into questions. When questions come up, you can answer them directly there and have a subject matter expert on hand that can help answer these questions. So you receive feedback immediately, especially if you're trying to go through a new product and work through a new product of, oh, there's something that we didn't consider. This person is getting hung up on this step, for example. Let's address this right here, but then also take that feedback back to our team. So I found that really, really helpful to do intimate workshops.
Yeah, that's great. Wesley, how about your company?
So I go to a lot of meetings and internally at the company, and so that helps with bringing some precognition about what's coming. And so it's almost like when you buy a brand new car and then you start seeing that car on the road. That kind of primes me for when I'm into the community and I can see some patterns. Almost like the Matrix, it starts speaking to me about the things that I've heard that are important. So not only just seeing terms, but seeing it in context about what I know other groups are really interested in understanding, how it's being received or the problems or improvements that might feed back into their iteration cycle. So that's one way that I prime, then go to the community, see it, and then of course acclimate there and see things that I don't see haven't seen before, and then those are interesting, and then I bring those back. And so that's kind of like when I can make that connection of like understanding what's important, understanding what's actually being engaged with and the participation of the community, and be able to say like, hey, I know you've asked for this, and feed that back saying this is coming to support your need. That's kind of like how I work with the cycle of internal stakeholders and external community members, to make sure that all the information gets to all the people most of the time. Of course, there's going to be some things that fall through the cracks. I don't catch everything, but I try to do that as much as possible. And I have an awesome community manager, Maria, that's helping with sorting through this out. So I don't want to make sure that I don't sound like a person that does everything. I have a great team, so it takes a lot of orchestration and monitoring. And of course, we use tools like Orbit. We use tools like Crunch and Crunch Data to kind of like make some general patterns for terms and word clouds and that kind of thing. So it's meticulous work, part science, part artistry.
For sure. That's great. Christina, any thoughts? And then we'll move on to next question.
I would say that as a newer DevRel org, we're trying to still figure it out, generally speaking. So it's interesting because you would say, oh, PayPal's been around forever. True, but the DevRel role hasn't been around forever. And so we do have Orbit. We have ways of listening in like feedback forums. I do sessions with developers and our product owners directly so that they can hear from developers directly and try and understand the sentiment. I think that for me, as someone who came from a non-tech background, it's important for me to put developers at the table with product owners so that they can hear and feel what that challenge feels like to a developer. I think sometimes I can advocate as much as I want, but it's easier for them to feel the pain if the customer is there and can advocate for themselves. So I do provide that avenue for developers within our organization, and it goes a long way. I think it helps in the future build from a product and engineering perspective because they'll remember that session when the developer was there and was feeling the pain of, trying to use their product.
Yep. So a couple of the very first developer relations events that I went to where I was just an attendee, I would kind of tag along with the DevRel team from SendGrid and go see their workshops and hackathons. And I remember sitting back going, that's a job? Like, that's awesome. You get to like travel and do all these things. But, obviously with pandemic, it shut down a lot of travel. But I think the events definitely sort of cinched it for me. One of the best experiences that I had was actually at Google I/O in 2011 and 2012, where they had workshops like at the event that you could go and attend, and it was just full of their DevRel team, and they're like, "Here's like a little workshop that you're gonna work through, and if you have questions, like people are gonna wander the room and like help you out." And I remember thinking like that is such an amazing kind of role, not just from the glitz and the glamour of it, but just you can sit down and you can get like one-on-one help. Like you can literally talk to somebody from Google about Google, like while you're trying to implement things. And the second year that I went to Google I/O, all I wanted to do was go hang out in these workshops and just sit and chat with these people. And I got to know some of them really well. And in fact, to this day, I still, not as much in recent years, but still stay in touch with Brian Dorsey at Google. Like fantastic person, fantastic human being. And like Danny said, it was it's not really about the celebrity. I mean, certainly DevRel, you can kind of gain sort of that celebrity status. I think of people like Kelsey Hightower and so on that are like really well known as advocates for developers, maybe not in a DevRel specific role, but they are very much an advocate for developers, in that education side of things. Yeah, I think just seeing that passion and that drive of like, let me sit down and like, you know, talk with you about your pain points, and then let me take that back to the team and see if we can make this better for others. Cool. Let's change gears a little bit. So we have the whole channel here with Tech Interview Guide is about like how do you get a job in tech, and so let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about two things. One, how do you get a job in DevRel? We'll go into like what were your interview experiences like, maybe for your most recent role, but also like what kinds of attributes do you or could you have that would make you successful in the role? Like, do you need to be super extroverted? Do you have to do well with public speaking? Do you have to be a good technical writer? Do you have to be a good programmer? And I think we've kind of learned like the role is very different. Depending on your strengths, you can kind of lean into one thing or the other. But let's talk a little bit about like interview experience and like how you got into this role, or like how you would encourage somebody to get into this kind of role. Um, let's start with Lily, and then we'll kind of work the way up the interface. So we'll do Lily, Danny, Wesley, and then Christina.
Yeah, so pretty much how I got into every job in tech is networking. I know this is the buzzword of the century, it seems like, but truly, truly is exactly how I landed my last few roles. And I don't think I could have gone anywhere close without networking and really making connections, genuine connections as well. Outside of that, interviewing because I'm doing community management. So for me, it's really kind of showing off ideas, showing what I've done outside of work with communities, because I manage some smaller streamer communities, things like that, and just kind of showcasing what I've done there. That was really the most helpful for me in my interview processes. In terms of attributes, I think a desire to learn, because you're never done learning in general in tech. And so really coming in to tech knowing that you're going to be learning forever and ever and ever, but having a passion for it will be so incredibly helpful. In terms of the extrovert introvert, I'm pretty introverted, so I know you don't need to be super extroverted to do it. And the same goes with, do you love technical writing, or are you shying away from that? Do you love public speaking, or do you shy away from that? I think tech now is so open with having a place for a lot of people that you may have to dig a little bit to find out exactly what role you enjoy, but there's definitely an opening somewhere for you in tech. And so again, make those connections, do the networking, connect with people that you find interesting now. So if you hear, for example, Ian, Wesley, Christina, or Danny, and one of us says something that you really connect with us later on Twitter, chat with us about our experience. And we're probably not speaking for everyone, but my experience so far in DevRel has been everybody's really, really easygoing about sharing their experience and encouraging each other. And yes, Wesley, money.
I think he was snapping. I think he was
Oh,
snapping
okay.
fingers. Yeah,
Got it. I was just going to say tech pays very well too, which is why a lot of people are joining tech now. But that's a question I get a lot from people is, I see the money, but how do I get there? And they're terrified because they think they have to go to college again for the next 4 years or longer. It's like, no, not necessarily. Just basically lean into your passions and see how you can transfer the passions you already have or the experience you already have outside of tech into tech as well.
Yep. Yeah, and you walk us through, like, as a new code school graduate, what was your interview process like to get this developer relations job at New Relic?
Oh my gosh, the interview process was so stressful. It was fun. It was very fun because it's something that I had never really experienced before. At Turing, which was the code school that I went to, Turing School of Software and Design in Denver, they basically are teaching you how to become a software engineer. And that's exactly what the route I was going to go down. And so we had been practicing like technical interviews, behavioral interviews, and did great so essentially, sorry, let me back up here. I just emailed Jonan Scheffler. He was the director at New Relic for DevRel, and my previous girlfriend Lavisa Swallington was like, just email Jonan. He's making a team, and just email him and just see if you could just talk to him about DevRel. And I was like, okay, and just feeling a little defeated because I had just gotten like rejected by other companies and stuff. So I emailed him, and Jonan was really, really nice and was like, oh yeah, I can talk to you about DevRel. And so we meet up and we just have a good conversation about like life and goals. And then at the end, he was like, hey, so I'm making this team at New Relic. Do you want to interview for it? And I was like, what? Yeah, of course. Let me go put on a button-up shirt. Let's do this. And and so it worked out really well. And all the interview process was really great. And then it got to the point where it was like the technical interview portion of the whole process. And a big focus of his was to do a lot of streaming on Twitch, because like quarantine and COVID was still really happening, and it still is, but it was less open then. And he was like, okay, so the technical interview is just going to basically be as if you are live coding on Twitch. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And I asked for like a hint. I was like, can you give me an idea of what we're going to be working on? And he's like, oh yeah, it's just going to be like the game of life. And I was like, okay, sick. So I went home and I was like, all right, I didn't know about Conway's Game of Life. I thought he meant the Life board game.
With the little spinny wheel and the
Yeah,
cart that you put the
yeah,
pegs in. I loved
yeah.
playing that
So,
game as a kid. That was like one of my favorite games.
oh my, yeah, and I was like I was like just preparing for it. I was like, okay, so I'm gonna be making like a board game. Okay, so I'm gonna have a board. I'll probably have like some different like cells or anything and Oh my God. And then I get to the technical interview portion and he's like, okay, so today we're like pretending we're streaming on Twitch. And so I'm like, hey everyone, what's up? My name is Danny Ramos, blah, blah, blah. And trying to be like coming with some hot energy. And he's like, so we're gonna be building the Conway Game of Life. And I was like, I have no idea what that is.
It's like, that's not Parker Brothers.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what? So really the whole, like, I think what made me stand out is because I just immediately was like, wow, I actually have no idea what that is. You know what? Let's just figure out first where we need to start off. And so I just went from there and I started Googling things, and without even realizing, I was showing how I would work and like, learn in public on Twitch and like be, I guess, a relatable developer and just try to figure it out and try to drag my feet through the mud. And it worked out.
That's cool. Thanks, Danny. Wesley, what was your experience interviewing for like developer relations, developer advocacy kind of roles?
So there's a split between kind of like what Christina said before, that it's still relatively new. And so a lot of my experience with interviewing we're interviewing with people who were just learning or not super familiar with developer relations, and they were choosing or evaluating me for the role. And then some of them actually knew about it and had very particular needs. That being said, one piece of advice I would say before doing interviews is kind of what Lily was saying about like leaning into your strong suits. Know who you are, know where you're really passionate about and what you're going to excel doing, and make sure that you kind of craft your interview around that thing that is your core competency. It comes off a little disingenuous to say that you're super well-rounded and you can do everything. There's some things that you can do very well, some things that you're working on, some things that maybe someone else should do. So be very honest with yourself and know where you are in your journey before starting an interview. And when the things that my experience, because I've been doing DevRel, which 4 years, but I think in DevRel years it's like 20, is that it's hard for people to, just like the opening statement, the question, like, what is DevRel? Some people in some companies, even hiring and going through the interview process, don't know that answer and don't know what they're looking for. And so I usually try to suss out how developed and how much they know about stuff by asking some core questions. Like, how are you measuring this? What does success look like? Right. What is your onboarding in terms of like a 30, 60, 90, or how do you get people familiar with your product? Like, do you offer training just like your engineers? Like, how do you get people prepared? And some job descriptions also look like a laundry list of every single last thing. And so one is to take that list and then bring that into the interview to understand what are the weights for all of those, because some of those things are nice to have and some of those things are like are like non-negotiable. And so that's really important to go through the interview knowing exactly what is the job. Even though you think you know what it is, they may not know what it is. And so a lot of my interview process is just sussing that out. Like, what is the job? Do I think I can do the job? Because there's book smarts and then there's application. If you're really good at your fundamentals, you can adapt. And it's like once you know one language, you can start adapting that to another language. It's kind of like that with developer relations. Not everything's going to be same. Not everything's going to be the same. It's going to be very bespoke, depending on the company, depending on the vertical, depending on their focus for that quarter or even that year. And so understanding the fundamentals and then understanding your strong suits and then making sure that match is there. And so I fully lean into the thing where I'm interviewing the company, not just the company interviewing me.
Yeah, that's good. Christina, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I have another non-traditional entryway story. My non-traditional entryway story is there's an opportunity at PayPal to lead developer relations. And I'll piggyback on what Wesley was talking about earlier. And there is a difference, I think, within developer relations when you talk about doing developer relations and strategizing and being the strategy for developer relations. And so the opportunity that I took was to help from a strategy perspective to, make sure that we're putting the right things at the top and enabling our advocates and the community managers and our education teams to ensure that they're focused on the right things at the right time that are going to help the communities and our developers specifically. So I didn't necessarily I didn't sit down and do an interview to do this role. It was I stepped up to the opportunity, and a lot of that is because of the fact that I've been consistently at PayPal around the developer experience, whether it's with the documentation, the integrations, ensuring that listening in the communities. And so I didn't necessarily have to interview for roles. I naturally, like everyone said, I gravitated towards what I was good at and what I'm passionate about. And that's where, I love the developer relations and the developer advocacy space, because you do get to go where your energy goes, and you get that opportunity to focus. And, as long as you know what it is you like to do, whether that's managing the communities, creating content, making it apps. And I'm going to go fully with everyone else. You don't have to be an introvert or an extrovert. You could be either or. And there's something there for everyone. You can, I've seen people that want to build the sample apps. Like, you totally can do that. Like, build the sample apps. Like, you can do. You want to be on the stage and doing conferences and you're the limelight. That's also the thing you could do. So I totally appreciate Dev Relations for that. What I can say I look for in DevRel folks for our team is a lot of the qualities that everybody already brought up. So I don't think I can add anything to what they've already said, because all of it was amazing.
Great. I will say from my own experience, like, I ran the gamut. Having recently gone through the job application process, I did everything from the mock live stream with New Relic to put together a presentation on a topic that doesn't have to be technical, and then put together a technical talk where you're actually live coding like you would at a conference, to just conversation. Getting the job at Postman, I joke with people that I felt like I had a cheat code in my pocket, because being a teacher at Turing, I was teaching the backend program and I was teaching API design, and I was using Postman. And because we had gone remote, we were recording the classes for students to review later. And so I actually just gave them a copy of the video of me teaching Postman, and like 3 conversations later, I had a job offer. And I'm like, this is fantastic. But like, some of them, like, I had to build an app, I had to deploy it, to show that I've got developer chops. Some of them wanted the public speaking, so they wanted to see videos of public speaking events that I'd been a part of, or like blogging. Like, show me the blog articles that you've written in previous DevRel roles, how you're kind of blogging now. Let's see your community skills. Like, can you log into our community and like interact with our community? And I'm like, how about I just give you like, my 2 million views on Quora.com and my, 40,000 karma points or whatever from Stack Overflow. Like, is that enough? And they're like, yeah, okay. And so like, sometimes having that background can certainly help transition and make the interviews a little bit easier. But just like any kind of interview, whether it's a software development kind of role or a sales kind of role, you have to demonstrate your level of skill, and they're really assessing, like, do you have the level of skill that we want? And it was interesting that you brought up kind of the laundry list job description of like, here's this mythical unicorn that we want to have join our team, but like, not all of those things carry the same weight. And so going into that interview and asking them like, which of these things are really important? But then having the company say, well, which of these things do you really want to do? Because we have needs and strengths on our team. And so one question that I learned to ask of companies as I'm interviewing them is, what do you hope the next person on your team brings to the team? And then I would kind of use their answer to like figure out how I'm going to go through the next stage of the interview. But I found that it was really telling, and at a couple of jobs are like, well, we have people that are really good at writing blog content, but they don't like doing videos. Or we have people that do videos, but they don't like writing content. Or we want to get into live streaming, but nobody's got the equipment. Or blinky flashy lights in the background, or just silly stuff, right? And so there was a lot of aspects of like, what do you want to do in this kind of role? And I think that one nice thing about developer advocacy is that there's so much opportunity to get involved. And I agree with Christina, what you're saying, like, you don't have to be an introvert or an extrovert. You could be an ambivert, because it is kind of a spectrum of like, where do you live on that scale? And if you're feeling more introverted, you don't have to be online today. Like, you don't have to be the face of something. If you don't want to do the conference talk, you don't have to. Like, there are other people that you can give that content to that'll go give that talk as long as they're prepared. Like, there's a lot of sort of give and take within the role. And I think the bigger the organization, the more fluid that can feel. There was a question in chat about like, how big are your DevRel teams? And I think, Lily, you answered like, I've been on teams as small as 2. I've been on teams as big as 20 plus. I actually applied for a couple of roles where I was going to start their developer relations team. Like, they were tiny little startups. I was going to be the first one. And after I applied, I'm like, do I want to be the first one? Like, do I want to have to go into that job every day and justify why I'm necessary? Because there is a bit of a stigma on like, are you doing marketing? Are you doing sales? Are you doing support? Are you doing like all these things that we kind of talked about, like these misconceptions about like, what is DevRel? And so going through the process with some of these companies and trying to understand, like, why do you think you need DevRel? Like, why are you starting a DevRel team? Is it just because it's like the flavor of the month and it's like the new hot thing that everybody's hiring for? Or do you genuinely understand why you need developer relations? And through some of those conversations, you're like, well, we don't really know. Like, we're hoping you could tell us why we need developer relations. I'm like, I'm out. Like, I'm not going to come in here and justify why you need DevRel. You should be telling me why you need DevRel. And so it wasn't something I wanted to go in and like start and like be the anchor and like kind of grow the thing from there. I mean, it would be nice to have kind of that leadership skill sort of exercised as part of that, but not really something that I wanted to do when the company themselves didn't know what developer relations was going to be. So cool. Great conversation there. We did have another question from Zooey. They asked a while back in chat, like, how do you get into this role? How do you, what did you find most passionate about your role? So like, what part of your role are you just like, I can't wait to dig into that and do that? Let's kind of go counterclockwise here. We'll start with Christina and we'll go back down through Wesley, Lily, and then Danny. Like, what do you love most about your role? Like, what gets you really fired up as in developer relations?
Man, that's a solid question. And I think it's a solid question for me because I context switch so often at work, and I'm not necessarily sure which one I like the best. But let me figure this one out. So what part? When I'm sitting in meetings at work and I bring up the experience of an external developer and it's something that the organization didn't think of, like that to me, like that's fire for me, because it's like I feel worthy at that point because one, I know what I'm talking about, but two, like they're listening to me and they're listening not to me, but they're listening to the developers through me, right? And so I love being able to advocate at work and seeing the fruits of my labor of being out in the community and listening. Listening to me is, I should say, communicating to me isn't necessarily just talking, it's listening as well. And so I spend a lot of my time listening to developers from our community to try and understand what they're trying to say. I will say that there's oftentimes I've seen, the FUs, the bad languages, the we hate yous and all that. But realistically, I understand the challenges and the pain. And for me, it's just trying to get to that root cause so I can sit in the seat in a product meeting and be able to advocate for the developers. And so I love just advocating, and well, we can all say it. I like being right. No, I'm just kidding.
That's great. Cool. Thanks, Christina. Wesley.
You thought you were wrong, but you were mistaken. I like being a unblocker of roadblocks. I like adding viscosity to friction. I like being able to help people through a process, and that works on both the internal and external. So if a developer says, I'm getting this error, I'm running into this weird issue in my code, or how do I get more credits? Just anything that helps them move forward and be part of their journey. And sometimes it feels insignificant, but turns out to be significant. I remember I still have people reach out to me like, do you remember that time where I had this thing and you just sent me the documentation and like, that was so amazing. I was stuck on that for weeks, and you just totally just like one couple keystroke, you made life easy. I love those stories. You don't always hear back about how your impact actually helps someone, but when they come back, I really love those. And then it helps internally as well. When like I've been in the industry for a while, and so when there's business processes or people are like saying, how does this work, or what will work better, being able to say, well, when I was over at MongoDB, this is what we did, or when I was at IBM, this is what we did, or when I was at AMD, or when I was at Atlassian, when I was in all of these different like things and companies that I worked for in different capacities, being able to take all of those little things and like put it together as a new thing to address new problems internally to our company, and say, this is how we've solved it in the past, or I've seen it being solved, or this is some things that help unblock us when we are trying to figure this out, or make sure you ask these questions and make sure that we don't have any wasted work and that we're moving in the right direction. Those types of things where I feel like I can be in the room as both like a spy to the community, where I can say, the community would really love it if you did that over that, is probably one of the time where I can feel like I'm helping, but also making sure that I'm advocating for what's best for the developers.
Good. Lily, how about you? What gets you fired up about your job?
I love building the one-on-one relationships. That's really, really important to me, especially in my experience, at least. Once I get the developers to understand that I'm not there to sell them a product, but I'm really, really wanting to learn about their experience, I really get a front row seat to what they're building and what they're doing and how they're utilizing my organization's products and services. And that's been so exciting to see, including also celebrate successes with them when they do finish a project and they really love to show it off, and they'll ping me and show it to me because they're so excited, because I've been there with them every step of the way, essentially. So that's what really gets me fired up, is definitely that one-on-one relationship that is genuine from my end, and that I can tell they appreciate, and that it's genuine from their end as well.
Yep, that's great. Danny, I know New Relic puts a big emphasis on the word authentic. So I know that plays a big role in your culture as a team. But what do you like most about being in DevRel?
Yeah, a big part right now for me is I'm working a lot more with students. So it's just really cool to be creating relationships with people that are pretty much in the same level as me. It's very top of mind for me. I was in your shoes 2 years ago, and I'm still in your shoes. I'm still learning, and I'm still trying to get more and more knowledge, and, running into failures here and there. And so it's cool. It's really cool to have this be part of my job, where I can not only like be a mentor, but also like feel mentored and learn from them as well. And a really cool part right now is that I get to run this podcast with Lauren, who's supposed to be here, called Launchies. Follow us on Twitter, Launchies Show. And right now we're just focusing on the interview process and how, I don't know, we're just like sharing resources, interviewing people, and that's really fun. And plus travel's sick too. I've never traveled, so I'm just like going places I've never been before, and I'm like, oh, this is weird. This is my job right now.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I'm looking forward to getting back out to conferences again at some point. We had a question come in from LinkedIn that I want to address. And I'm going to just leave this open-ended for whoever wants to jump in and answer. Does involvement in open source communities truly play a large part in how a developer advocate's expertise and experience is perceived. So does involvement in open source
I'll say
play a large part?
depends.
Depends.
It all depends. I mean, there are several companies. Like I work for a closed source company, not an open source company, and so there is some overlap. You're able to prove like some of the work that you've done in public if you work for an open source company, so that's really great. But some companies, not so much. It doesn't matter. But there's elements that you can do. There's more openness, but that also means that there's also a little bit more chaos, and some companies require some sort of defined structure. And I'm not dissing open source, but I'm just saying that sometimes there's a process and a rubric to things. So it depends. But I'm going to say any experience is good experience.
Sure.
So I won't say that you will go wrong with participating in an open source community.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say that some of my favorite projects from last year was contributing to open source. And one of the big benefits for that was just kind of running into like the maintainers at conferences. Like I contributed to Ruby for Good and specifically like Casa. And I was at Strange Loop in St. Louis, and I was just sitting eating lunch, and I can't remember their name, but I'll remember eventually one day. But they came up to me and they're like, "Oh, I approved your PR," and I was like, "What?" And like it was just such a cool conversation, and it was just, you know, again, just building those relationships with people, and it's just so fun to kind of put a face to the tiny little picture that you see in GitHub.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, Strange Loop CFP is now open. Just putting that out there.
Cool. Any other thoughts on open source? I think it does. It definitely shows like collaboration skills, but also community, like just being involved in a community and like building up other people around you. That's one of the things that I think I really enjoy about this kind of role is like the education side of like you see that light bulb go off and you're like, oh, they're gonna go do something cool with that now. And I think that part of what gets me going is that education side. And I think being part of open source communities can definitely help give sort of an inroad into just helping other people out. And I think that really shows what being an advocate is. So, you know, whether it's going in and like fixing someone's documentation, like I recently added a pull request on somebody's open source for like, hey, here's like a little bit of a different explanation in your README file. And they merged it in. I'm like, yay, open source contribution for me. And you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's my job as an advocate. I'm making life a little bit easier for another developer to kind of understand. It was about these nanoleaf panels. It was a Python library for you know, how I make these things blink. And I basically went in and I rewrote like some of their examples because it hadn't been well explained. And that's kind of what I see as being an advocate is all about, is like, let's make life easier for those coming behind us. And so I'm a big fan of open source. Most of my career has been around open source technologies, open source stacks, teaching open source ways of thinking where we collaborate on ideas about what is an API. Well, let's talk about open API. The very name in and of itself it's meant to be like an open standard. You can go integrate it however you like, but it's meant to be like something community driven. And so I'm a big fan of any sort of community involvement where you can help each other out. In fact, my whole tagline for this stream is share what you know and we all win. And it kind of comes to the idea of like how the Ubuntu operating system got the name. Ubuntu is an African word for like together as one or something like that. It's like when we work together, like we're much better as a team than individuals. And so that kind of drove my whole passion of like, you know, I'm not going to go invent something that's going to change the world, but I can change Danny's world. And now I get to watch Danny impact other people's world. And so that's how I change the world, by changing Danny's world and then watching that kind of ripple effect kind of happen. And that's where I see a lot of this happening in developer relations, where you can have what may feel like a small impact, but you know, down the road, like Wesley was saying, like you might have somebody come up and be like, hey, remember that thing that you helped me with like a year ago, I'm like, no, I have no clue what you're talking about, but cool. All right. You made an impact on them, and that's fantastic. That's exactly what I think our role is around driving that community for sure. Trash Dev, good to see you in chat. Cool. We had a couple of other questions come in from chat as well. What are the various roles in DevRel, and which ones do you gravitate or repel from? I think we kind of covered this a little bit around like what gets you really fired up about your job, and we did talk a little bit about like what is DevRel and what is not DevRel. Any thoughts on like narrowing in on this question a little bit? Anybody have thoughts on like what are some other kinds of roles as developer advocates?
I think what Danny does is relatively new in DevRel, where they're streaming developer advocates. Like before the pandemic, there wasn't that many live streams, and in developer relations that being leveraged. There's also developer relations that are internal, meaning like they don't ever go outside the company. They're only customer or developer is those that work inside their own company. There are developer relations people that focus just on startups and those who are going through incubators, angel rounds of funding, just to try to make sure that those companies are set up for success on different software platforms. And then, of course, like Lily and I, there's community. Those just focus on that portion of developer relations. And depending on where you work, there's several different flavors. I would say when I was at IBM, most of my interactions was strictly third-party, non-owned properties. So Twitter, Reddit, Stack Overflow, anything that was not related to or owned by our company. So there's a ton of different flavors out there, and things that I'm not mentioning and things that are going to be invented.
That's good. Christina, did you have thoughts? I saw you on mute earlier.
Yeah, I was just gonna talk more about like how we're positioning it, and I'm not just whatever Wesley just said. That sounded really rude, so I'm sorry. But what Wesley just said, I agree 100% with. I know, right? It's late here. Clearly, I get my attitude at night. Sorry. So in our org, what we're organizing is in pillars more or less. So education, outreach, and support, which includes the education part, which is what Wesley was speaking to earlier. Really, like I call it alternative content because I think that the world learns differently nowadays, and so we are, in addition to creating documentation, I think you have to have this supporting other ways to learn where the developers are. So you and I and everyone here can talk about how many devs are on TikTok nowadays. Like I'm not, Lord knows, I'm not going to get on TikTok and do a TikTok. Like I'm not, but that's where they're sitting, TikTok. Right? And so I'm too old for that. But if you took the GitHub like yearly survey, they'll tell you like the average age of a developer and where are those developers sitting. They're sitting in TikTok right now. Like that's just where they're at, right? And so there's just alternative ways of learning. When you look at also the age of where developers are, 100 devs, they're learning differently than what we used to learn. Like they're not going to college for 20 years, right? And so they're taking a YouTube video and wanting to own their own destiny and figure it out on their own. And so I think organizations should acknowledge that and provide other ways of learning to support that, because I just take my approach, and my opinion is COVID thrusted us into a technology driven world. Everyone had to go online because nobody could be in person. And so in my mind, I put a lot of weight on the developer's experience, because who's getting people online? That's developers. And so, there's the advocates, there's the people making that alternative content, those who are out there talking and being thought leaders in the conferences, and then those that are supporting, whether that's in the channels or out in the communities. So those are the three pillars: is education, outreach, and support for us that have the different ways of work tracks, I should say, for any developer advocate.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to say whatever Christina said. And also this big emerging section called DX, or developer experience and developer relations. That's starting to really take off. And of course, inside developer relations, there's leadership structures that junior DevRel, management, directors, even some VPs of DevRel. Those are all different kind of facets that are kind of like in the whole facet of what is changing and what is evolving in developer relations.
That's good. Cool. Any last thoughts? We got a couple more questions to get through here from chat. Nope. Next question from Heartbender. How do junior and senior roles differ in developer advocacy?
One resource I want to throw out there is DevRel-ladders.com, which shows examples of different progressions through developer relations that different companies enact. And not everyone does it the same. There are many different ways that people decide. There are companies that only hire senior DevRel. There are people who are just called a developer advocate, but they're also the only developer advocate in the company. So they're senior and junior and whatever. They are all the things. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not formulaic. It's not also, there's no standard. There's no even a good rule of thumb. It's all over the place no matter what company you're with. There's not a conventional ladder or progression through developer relations.
I think with like most jobs, I think, seniors and juniors, you're doing the same work. There's just, I think, a slightly different expectation on the quality of the work or the type of content that you're making. So whether you're coming in as like a junior developer or senior developer or junior DevRel versus senior DevRel, it's like you're still going to be blogging, you're still going to be live streaming, maybe you still might give a technical talk or a workshop. It's just the expectations might be a little different as far as like, the amount of content you produce or how many talks you do, or how many CFPs you submit to like maybe go do a talk. I think that you're really just doing the same thing, just different quantities and different levels of expectation. Christina or Lily, like any experience you can share there as far as like what you've seen around leveling there?
I'm going to have a non-traditional response. Sorry.
No, totally right.
Non-traditional is my word of the day. Let's call it that. So I think there's still an opportunity. So like junior, senior, it's still an organization, and there's still going to be a need to operate and have like business operations. It's still an engineering team. They're still going to have the same, I feel, issues that a regular engineering. How do we work together? How do we work with our team, our product teams? How do we work with our community? How do we work with, like, I feel like there's this, it's not necessarily talked about, but they still have the same problems as building an organization. And in addition to being DevRel, right? And so I know, like for me, some of the biggest challenges is, where do I go if I get this issue? And that's a learning, and you start to create these operational processes and these things. But I still think that there's that opportunity, a junior, senior, like there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be gaps. There's always going to be things to solve for. And I think that, like, in addition to, it's what the company makes that ladder look like for the organization, and it's also what you make that ladder look like for the organization. You have an equal, or if not more, ability to like own your path. And I like to advocate for people to own that, right? If you see a gap, fill it. You're only doing the company a favor by filling the gap. You're only paving your way in the future for someone to say, do you remember when Christina found that problem and she put a solution together, and then she put a process and everybody started doing it? Like, you're only going to do good for the organization. And so there's so much more than just a dev advocate or just this. It's still an organization that needs a lot of things.
It's good. It's good. Lily or Danny, any thoughts on that?
I was pretty much going to second what Christina said. So yeah, pretty much exactly what she said. It's really, if you see that opening, pursue it, most definitely.
Yeah. Zooey asked another question in chat. What do you find most challenging in the DevRel space, and how have you overcome it, or challenges that you're seeing in the future in the DevRel space, and what you're doing to get ahead of it? Zooey coming in with some great deep questions here. So what's a sort of challenge that you see in DevRel, and sort of how are you dealing with that, or what do you see coming down the road, and like, are you trying to get in front of that?
Executive buy-in has been a challenge for many organizations that I've been a part of just, do we really need this? What do you all do all day? And really that. And then the other challenge that I see discussed a lot within the DevRel field is just, how do we measure what we do? What's our key measurements?
Yeah, good.
One other thing that came to mind was just burnout in general, especially within DevRel. You're traveling a lot, you're working on different projects, you're meeting a bunch of people, you're kind of like the face of the company in some ways. So you have to be nice all the time. That was one thing that I recognized immediately, because I was told, like, oh, you're gonna burn out really quick, or you're gonna get, it's a very tiring job. And I was like, no, I'm young, whatever, it's all good. And immediately I was like, this is so hard, because you're just traveling, you're working on demos for conferences, and then you're doing all that again the next week, and then you're never home. My tortoise was getting sad. It was just like, it was all kinds of things that were coming up. And so now, because I've gone through that experience, now I can preemptively prevent that, to try to get ahead of things. And when I find time on my calendar, I'm like, okay, this is focus time, or I'm going to work on this now because I have to get this done in 2 months or 1 month or whatever.
Good. Thanks, Danny.
I wanted to chime in. That's the hardest part, because developer relations is so new, and the situation where upper management or the C-suite or executives have more power. Sometimes that power trumps experience. So they'll force or really control like initiative or something to be done that is not the best thing to do. So that's probably one of the hardest things to kind of overcome in this profession, where that title trumps experience. And the way that I can try to get around that is to make sure to try to pre-explain and lay out strategy and tactics, as much of that beforehand, to say, like, this is currently what we have agreed on. This is the thing that we understand is the right approach. And we've gone through briefing, we've gone through explainers, we've gone through like a timeline and a rollout and a structure of how we're doing this. And so this thing that's coming in doesn't necessarily fit in that on this timeline. And that sometimes is a good enough prophylactic to keep it from actually impeding current initiatives, but sometimes it's not. And it's always one of those things where a pet project, or someone goes to a conference and learns something, and then they want you to implement it.
Yeah, it's good. Kubiti asked in chat, kind of as a follow-up, how do you prioritize avoiding burning out? A DevRel buddy of mine, if any of you know Eddie Zaneski, he's over at Amazon these days. I remember talking to Eddie when we were working at SendGrid, and he was really excited. He was coming through town, and he was like super excited. He's like, I fly back to New York and I get to go back to my apartment. And I'm like, okay, like, don't you do that all the time? He goes, no, I've literally been living in hotels for like 5 weeks straight. And I'm like, dang, you're paying for rent in New York and you're not even there. Like, that's ridiculous. Travel alone will burn you out. But, Lily mentioned in chat, like setting a good schedule, sticking to it, And just, you know, what Wesley was saying about like prioritizing things well and like sticking to it, I think is a good way to avoid the burnout. But at the end of the day, you still have to set good boundaries for yourself of like, what are you capable of doing? What do you like to do? What drains you? What recharges you? And like really understanding that, I think, is part of your role, I think plays a big part in kind of the avoiding of burnout. Christina or Lily, any other thoughts to share in there?
So I was gonna say I also put a lot of weight on making sure that you have the right leader, um, someone that's going to make that space and ensure that you aren't burning out. I think as a lead in my organization, I do take responsibility to ensure that I'm not overstretching and not having expectations on the dev advocates to do everything. I don't think that anyone would disagree. In my mind, dev advocates and DevRel is a very creative space. You have to have space to be able to think about a blog post or understand and create a video. Like there's a creative aspect to it that you have to have boundaries and space to be able to think in a way that is healthy. So it is equally important to find a leader that will give you that space and not let you have that burnout and experience that burnout. Because I'm not going to lie, in this space, it could come very feverishly fast because everybody wants everything and all the times. And you definitely need that healthy leadership, that healthy boundary. You set your healthy boundaries, you have the leadership that's setting boundaries, and you just, to me, that's the most important because yeah, you can definitely find that burnout real quick.
Yep. Cool. Next question that we had: how much does technology preference play a role in your job? That could be, so I'm interpreting that like that could be like your choice of tech stack, or it could be, you know, like the actual equipment that you lug around from place to place. I think having a nice light laptop if you're traveling, I think is good. You don't want to be lugging around one of those 15-pound like desktop replacements and like throw out your shoulder carrying that thing around everywhere. But I could read this as tech stack versus like just the day-to-day technology that you're lugging around. Do you think that plays any part of a role as a developer advocate?
I think so, but it really depends too. Like for New Relic, we're an observability platform, so we cover all kinds of tech stacks. So you can come in with, you know, JavaScript knowledge, Python knowledge. You can come in with, like for me, Ruby knowledge, and so a big part of being a developer advocate also is to like continuously learn. So, you know, I'm trying to learn JavaScript, I'm trying to learn Python, you know, all the fun things. But it also depends on like what community you want to be part of. You know, if you're going to be getting sent to conferences, you're most likely going to be sent to conferences that relate to your technical knowledge. So it's not like, they're not going to be like, hey, Danny, you want to go to this Kafka conference? They're like, no, I don't know anything. So they're going to send me to Ruby conferences, and luckily I really like the Ruby community, and the Ruby community is really great. And so, yeah, I guess those are things to consider when you're thinking about going into a DevRel role. Do you like the community that you're part of? I guess.
Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts?
I'll only talk about like our org, well, not really our org, but like PayPal owns Braintree, Hyperwallet, Venmo, Honey, right? So they all have different tech stacks. So it's not like I think you can come in and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like know any which one, or you have to have a preference, or you're only going to be a DevRel for Braintree because they use GraphQL. Like that's not how like it works. I haven't necessarily found a dev advocate in our group that has a preference per se. I mean, obviously they like one over the other, but what I love about dev advocates, especially in our organization, is that if somebody doesn't know something, let's get on a call and let's hash it out together. That's pretty much the mantra. So I usually love that, because even if you don't know something, someone else does, and let's get on a call and we're going to spend this afternoon trying to figure it out.
Yep. In fact, Christina and I were just on a call, a week and a half ago, between Postman and PayPal, and just trying to figure out, like, how do we do this thing in Postman? And it's like, well, let's get our resident expert on the line with you too, and had him chat with your team. So it was a fun call for sure. Small world. Yeah. Any other thoughts around tech stack advantages, disadvantages? Not really. No. We had a question come in from Trash Dev. Is it considered an advantage to have a DevRel team? Do you think that there's like a strategic advantage or disadvantage to whether you have a DevRel team within an organization?
I'm going to say yes. As a person who works in DevRel, I would like every company to have a DevRel team.
Fair. And
I would like everyone who wants to join a DevRel team to have the opportunity to have work and a job. But I also think that, I think developer relations is a really good combination of bird's eye view and worm's eye view of being really deep in the weeds, and also have like a really good overarching understanding and visibility of what's coming ahead and what's going on. And I think that every company will find a way to have DevRel in order to fill those functions. And if you don't have those functions, I'm not saying that you're at a loss, but it is something that I think is extremely helpful for every company that I've seen roll out DevRel and do it wrong and then realize they can do it right, or people who are fumbling their way through it. It's all understanding the philosophy of reaching out to the community and then figuring out how embracing that internally like really rejuvenizes all the different departments inside. And like everyone, instead of like feeling their way through the fog in the dark, they have like, oh, I was outside. I can tell you exactly what it looks like out there. And it's great. I can't see why a company would not find value in that, but that's my opinion, which is extremely biased.
Well, like I mentioned, like on my job hunt, like, chatting with companies about like, oh, we want a DevRel team, but they don't understand why. It's like, oh, we see other people hiring for DevRel, so I guess we need DevRel too, because we want to be like everybody else and we want to be successful, but they don't understand why, like what value is it actually going to be bringing. Where companies that are like, no, this is the community that we have, this is how we want to foster it, this is how we want you to be a part of that, and the experience that you can bring. Like companies that know why and how they want to implement DevRel are like amazing companies. Christine, I saw you on mute too. What do you have?
I'm gonna be it depends on this one. I'm gonna be it depends. Right. So I think there's a lot of different factors that play into it. I had another tweet that went around. In order, like, you don't have to be a dev advocate or in DevRel to be a dev advocate. Like, I truly believe that anyone has the opportunity and ability to be a dev advocate. I think that to the point that I had earlier, it takes leadership to give you healthy boundaries and give you the expectations and set the levels of like what it is you do from a DevRel perspective. I'm only thinking like, does a grandma who's starting up a new Shopify website on the internet, does she need a dev advocacy team? No. Like, that's why I say it depends. There's so many different like just scenarios. There's B2B, there's B2C, there's B2D, like D2D, like all of these different models. So I think it just depends. Does it help? Absolutely. I think that, like I said earlier, there's a certain creative space in DevRel, and you don't necessarily get that from the product and engineering team that's creating a product. Like, you just don't, like, they don't think of it in the way that DevRel does. So is there an advantage? Yes. but is it necessary? I just say it depends on the business and the organization and where they're at from a maturity level. You shouldn't start early. I mean, you found that out, right? If they can't tell you what it means or what it's like meant for, obviously they don't need a DevRel yet. They don't even know about it. They don't know what to do with it. So I wouldn't necessarily at that stage say they need DevRel, but maybe they get their stuff in their ducks in a row and then they can have DevRel. But I'm a depends.
Yeah. Zanyan, thanks for the follow. First chat also says, I think it generally makes, it seems that generally the business needs to have a B2B model, business to business model to have DevRel really make sense. Maybe, but I mean, well, actually pretty much every company where I was doing like developer relations or wannabe DevRel at SendGrid, there was definitely B2B there. But I think that, even just hobbyists that want to use your product or your API or something, like they could still benefit from having developer relations. But kind of going back to what we were saying early in the stream of like, what is DevRel and what is not DevRel? Like, is DevRel meant to be a support channel? Is it meant to be a marketing channel? Is it meant to be part of sales? Like Lily brought up really early in the stream, like developers don't like to be sold to, like if you go to a conference and you're like, here's why our product's the best thing since sliced bread, like everybody's going to tune out and be like, whatever. But like going in and showing them the value of it, like this is the impact that we have. You can use it or not. We've got a free tier that you can like lean into. I mean, at Postman, we love leaning into that free tier. It's like you don't have to upgrade. Like it does plenty just on the free one all by itself. Shameless plug for Postman. But you can you can sort of distance yourself from that kind of sales side of it, but it is a little bit of a culmination of all of these things. I mean, depending on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a business person, maybe it's going to be more that salesy kind of conversation. If it's more like the hobbyist open source and they just want to know how to use your product, it might be a little more on the support side. Or, but at the end of the day, it's all community. And in DevRel, we typically talk about what we call the 3 C's of like code, community, and content. And that's really what our role comes down to, is like, how do we come up with the content that's going to help people out? How do we foster that community? And for a lot of what we do, there may or may not be coding involved, but it is definitely going to be part of the process, I think, especially when it comes to interviewing. They want to see you demonstrate your level of skill in any of these combinations of things. And then it comes down to how well do you fit that gap? As I think Christina was saying, like what's the gap and how well can you fill that gap? Yeah. Any other thoughts? We're coming up on an hour and a half here, and I do want to respect everybody's time, especially those on the East Coast. But yeah, any other thoughts? Anything else you want to dive into?
I guess I want to throw this in
Sure.
here. I got hired remotely, and I just went into the office for the first time yesterday, and that was insane. It was crazy. Free LaCroix. I was like, this. I'm not going to leave. So, yeah, if you're thinking about going into tech, a lot of cool benefits like that, and snacks.
Lots of snacks and foosball tables and everything else. Like those were all the perks back in the day, and then the pandemic hit. And it's like, I gotta buy my own LaCroix now. This stinks. Like, I actually had to go buy. Well, I didn't have to. I chose to buy like a little hot water, cold water like thing. Like I was like this close to getting a microwave to put down here in my basement. It's like, I don't need a microwave. I can walk up to the kitchen. I'm not that lazy. But having the hot water thing right here, like I basically had to build my own sort of like, what do I miss about being in the office, and like build it here at home. And now that I'm 100% remote, like, we don't even have an office in the Denver area. Like a bunch of us that work in Denver, I think are going to get together tomorrow for a coffee. But we don't have like a Denver hub for Postman. I would literally have to travel out to like San Francisco or New York to actually visit one of our like campus locations. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting perks to being in an office for sure. How do y'all feel about like the whole remote back to office? Given the travel that is kind of part of this role, depending on your level of involvement. how are y'all feeling about like back to office versus travel and so on?
I'm remote. That's the job's remote. I don't have to go back to an office. I don't have to worry about that. I will travel to an office occasionally, but that's a flight. But it's not something that was one of the things that were built into the role. It was made remote. I am remote, so it's not something that I have to worry about.
Yep.
Same here. I was hired on remotely, and I just will go into the office sometimes. Or I mean, yesterday was the first time, and I plan on trying to go again in the future. And I have no problem with traveling. I have gotten COVID twice now, and I'm okay, fortunately. So I'm okay with traveling.
Yeah. That was one thing I brought up in my interviews a lot of, you know, they're like, well, how do you feel about conferences? I'm like, I can't wait to get back to conferences. Like I'm less thrilled about like getting on an airplane with a bunch of other people. But you know, if it's something I can like drive to within a reasonable amount of time, like I might drive to an event. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But, Zooey says in chat, I just got the call that we're going hybrid when he starts his job in a month. So that's great. Cool. Well, that was all the questions that we had come in from chat. That was the question that we had come in from LinkedIn. Really appreciate everybody's time. I think exploring like what is developer relations, I think is really helpful. And, you know, there are a lot of facets to it as we all kind of talked about like our own little kind of role and what we do. I think it just kind of goes to show there's a lot to DevRel, developer advocacy, and, you know, the whole idea of like community building and helping each other out. Really, really appreciate everybody's time and perspectives. Appreciate that so much. One of the things that I love about doing the live stream is just having people on the stream that can share their opinions, and maybe we don't all agree and maybe someone thinks we're rude, but you know, at the end of the day, it's all good fun. And really appreciate everybody's time and ideas and so on. Thanks so much to everybody for the chats and dropping questions for us for the panel as well. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much. This coming Sunday is just going to be Q&A on the stream, so I'm going to get back to my backlog of questions. So come back and hang out with us. Appreciate all the follows. Again, thanks for all the new folks that drop by and first-time chatters and so on. Please come back again and share your perspectives in chat. And if you're interested in being on the stream sometime, hit me up. You can reach me through the website, techinterview.guide. All my contact info is on there. I use Ian Douglas 736, this little username right here on Zoom that you see. I use that just about everywhere. So you can contact me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Linktree, all the places. How can everybody reach everybody else? So I've been sharing out like the link to my Twitter where I kind of listed you all on Twitter and the LinkedIn event where it's got access to all your LinkedIns. But give a shout out to where folks can find you and you know, how you want to stay in touch with people. Don't be shy.
I'll go first. I'll be the first. I'm just dev_Christina on Twitter or Christina Monti on LinkedIn. Or you'll find me burning in Arizona. That's pretty much it.
That's great. Thanks, Christina. Appreciate your time.
I'm Wesley83 pretty much everywhere. The best way to contact me is through Twitter. My DMs are open, so you can reach me there. If you send me a connection request on LinkedIn, expect me not to answer it. So if you really want to talk to me, hit me up on Twitter.
He answered mine, just saying. I think it was because I was connecting about this event, though, so it's all good.
I'm Moy Danny on Twitter. That's usually the best place to get a hold of me. And I don't even know my LinkedIn. I think it's just Daniel J. Ramos. But Twitter's the best spot. Twitter's the best spot. Or if you listen to my podcast, Launchy's Show on Twitter, and
definitely check out Launchy's.
Yeah. We have Ian.
I hear there's a really good guest coming up on a future episode.
Yeah, we got a lot of good guests. So yeah. Come check it out.
Cool. Lily, how can folks find you?
Twitter is the best under Grumpy Snack. If you don't know how to spell that, just go to Ian's tweet. You'll find me. And that is truly the best way to reach me.
Grumpy Snack. Awesome. Again, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much for hanging out tonight. Thanks for all the questions. We'll see everybody on Sunday, and stay safe out there. Stay warm if you're cold. Stay cool if you're warm, and we'll catch you on the next stream. See you, everyone.